My name is Janine. Welcome to Indica with Me. Indica with Me is a podcast that inspires to create a progressive led space for Black Southern creators to have important conversations about chronic pain, marijuana, its derivatives, and other progressive themes in an effort to elevate the consciousness of ourselves and our viewers. This podcast is a call to action to live genuinely, cultivating real conversations about traditional topics in untraditional ways that will give a voice to those who are usually silenced, but going through the struggle. This is their space. This is our space. This is Indica with Me. This will be our first segment on white crime. And during this segment, we will talk about what it means to spin the media in a way that benefits the person in whom is giving you the spin. This is something that has been popular for a very long time. News media outlets use the spin factor in order to make whomever they are telling the story about look like the good guy. They turn villains into heroes, and they turn missionaries into benefactors, and they turn victims into crime, which is one reason why we call the segment white on white crime, because white on white crime is just as bad as black on black crime. Because as it turns out, you are more likely to be killed by someone who looks like you than someone who doesn't look like you. Why? Because as a society, we are still very much segregated along cultural, racial, economical, and means, which in a lot of cases leads us to spending more time who look like people who look like us. So, that being said, black on black crime is something they created in order to make it seem like black people are just more violent. The reason why black on black crime is so bad is because black people are just so are so fucking violent. But in reality, Asian on Asian crime, white on white crime, black on black crime, we are all disproportionately likely to kill people who look like us. So, what a great place to put this educational bill, a bill that they call the Learns Act, but what should actually be called the Arkansas Emergency School Bill. Why? Because it declares an emergency not only in the title, but also in the subtitle. And I quote, this act is to create the Learns Act to amend various provisions of the Arkansas Code as they relate to early childhood through grade 12 education in the state of Arkansas, and to declare an emergency and for other purposes. Then it continues in the subtitle to say that this is to declare an emergency. And then in the very first section, just in case you were confused, media, on how you're supposed to talk about this, it is actually called the Learns Act and shall be, to quote, shall be known and may be cited as the Learns Act because it makes us look better. And we don't really want people to think that we are passing an emergency bill after Republicans have been in power for the past 5 years and could have passed this bill anytime during those 4 years. I looked back over Arkansas history, past 10 years in Senate and the House, and it turns out since 19, where's what I'm looking for? House Representatives. This is from um ballotpedia.com, which is a place where you can go and look up information about what's going on politically in your area. Also, it helps you to know who's on the ballot, what's on the ballot. And when it comes to laws like this one that we're allowed to vote on, which we weren't able to vote on this one because they declared a state of emergency, which is why I was able to pass in less than 10 days, is because Governor Sanders said, "We are in an emergency." Even though Arkansas Republicans have been in power since 2012 and have had well over the majority since 2014, we absolutely have to pass this corporate school bill in 8 days without any litigation, without any debate, without any voters, because we are in a state of emergency and our schools are failing. Okay. So let's just not take notes from our politicians who serve us on how we should best communicate these ideas to the public. Okay. Maybe we should just tell people what they mean and not what they want us to say. So moving on from there, the bill immediately begins to talk about officers in uniform. They are normalizing officers being in school at all times. Now, they first start talking about training. They require officers to go through an additional 40 hours of basic school resource training from the Arkansas Center for School Safety and Criminal Justice Institute. Now, I just found out what this institute is. It is an organization that has been created by Arkansas to educate teachers, resource officers in the schools only. There's a whole department for this. That blows my mind. That we literally created an institution to better police our minors. That was a purposeful abbreviated pause. Why are we more concerned? Obviously, it's on the first page of the bill about policing our minors than taking care of them. I have a concern about that. They have in here that officers must attend a youth mental health training required by the State Board of Education, which is literally defined by the Secretary of Education, which is Jacob Oliva, who we will talk more about later. But they purposely took out the fact that the Institute, the Criminal Justice Institute for Arkansas Safety, School Safety, has a certification youth mental health first aid program. And not only do they have this program, it is free. So why not have them qualified, certified to deal with mental health crises? It continues to go on in this bill to say that the superintendent has to take this certification and they have to take it yearly. But for officers, are saying that they need training after 5 years of being on the force, working in the school. And they have to complete a 16-hour resource training after every 5 years. But it is still not required for them to ever take the certification in youth mental health first aid. Why not? If Great, the superintendent has to take this training. I think they should have to. I think all staff should have this available to them. And it should be a requirement for police officers who are going to end up dealing with these youth during their mental health crises in the moment. Why wouldn't we want them to be certified in the best way of dealing with them, the best way of treating with them, the best way of helping them? Especially when we know where there are more resource officers, there are more Black and Brown students who are going to be harassed and more harshly punished in a way that will affect them for the rest of their lives over the other groups of students in the school. So, yes, they should be trained in a way that's going to best benefit the student. Moving on. Next, they remove teacher contracts and push a raise of 5% for each student, each teacher, staff member working. This brings up the average income, the incoming income of teachers from $36,000 to about $50,000, which is great. It's still, I mean, it's lower than what Warren ran on when she was running for president. She said that every teacher in the United States should have the base pay of $60,000 a year. And here, they're not even talking that's the base pay, and they're not talking about any raises after that. So they took away the teacher's ability to negotiate through contracts and told them that you all can have a 5% raise coming into the business. But then they say that the only other way that you can get a raise is if you get some other type of qualification, like a master's or one other type of certificate training. And that's it. Those are the only two things that offer you a raise. So as a teacher, you have two opportunities to get a raise in the state of Arkansas. And after that, you're pretty much stuck in that pay raise, taking away rights from the teachers. Now, I have a couple of teachers in Arkansas who are friends of mine, and I did notice just in conversation, like around when the school year started, and they would mention in conversation that they're still waiting for the contracts. The contracts haven't come out. The contracts are delayed, and I wasn't expecting for them to take the contracts away from the teachers completely, but it didn't surprise me because there has been a delay in giving the teachers what they've asked for to begin with. And as we know, the pay was already low. They were making about $36,000 a year. So if a teacher is already making more than the $50,000 a year, they're going to get a one-time pay raise of $2,000. And that's it. The right to negotiate is no longer available to teachers. Not only that, it takes away their opportunity to be notified when their job ends and whatever else might be covered by that contract, because Arkansas is an work at will state, at will work state, meaning you work as long as we will you to work here. Once we're finished with you, you're done. We don't have to give you a notice. We're not required to give you a severance. You work as long as we need you, and then you're done. Which again, I'm never for taking rights away from the workers. So this is something that I don't stand by. Saying we're putting this out there, but we're also taking away your opportunity to succeed and be paid what you're worth in the future. It's not okay. It continues with safety checks. The safety checks, they work a lot with the School for Safety of Criminal Justice Institute that was created for Arkansas resource officers to be trained. Also, I mean, to talk about officers again, it's a catch-22 because we do need safety in schools because of the nature of our society and the lack of comprehensive gun control and background checks for people getting guns in general. Just talking about schools, and this was found on edweek.org, there have already been 9 school shootings. In those 9 school shootings, there have been 11 people shot. 8 of them were injured. 3 of them were murdered. 2 of them were minors. 1 was a school staff member. So safety checks are necessary. Police officers are necessary. And we also have to acknowledge that where there are more officers, more Black and brown people are harassed in society. There is data to back that up. The Arkansas Center for School Safety and Criminal Justice which I'm sure we're going to end up doing an entire episode on all by itself, will handle cyberbullying, human trafficking, gangs, weapon possessions by minors. Because while there have only been 11 school shootings, I know for sure that there have been more instances where people have shown up, students, learners, etc., have shown up to institutions with guns. And as long as no one's hurt, we don't hear about it in most cases. So, weapon possession by minors and threat to weapons at a school, which obviously would be by non minors. Um, they do police training for all of those K through 12. Um, Again, I'm unsure. It's a catch-22 when talking about putting police officers in schools. And the exact quote from the bill is increase in uniformed law enforcement in public school campuses at all time. That's the goal. They want to continue to work with police by creating what I have dubbed the red phone, where they just pick up their bat phone and they call the and it goes straight to law enforcement and it says, "Hey, there's a live shooter. We need help. Somebody help us. There's a live shooter." Right? And just have a direct line to the police station because we can't create laws to protect our children. They also want to allow immediate live streaming of cameras from the schools to the police station so they can know exactly where a live shooter is when they are in the school. And it took me a while to be comfortable saying that. Just what they want to have cameras in the schools for live time accuracy to know when and where live acting shooters are. We are literally creating training, creating institutes, and forcing emergency training on our students and staffs and teachers because we are deciding not to create a better, safer society by creating comprehensive gun laws, but we're going to use school funding to, quote, train nurses and staffs in emergency responses, including opioid overdoses, bleeding control, the use of law enforcement, and all these new policies that they're putting in place, and live action cameras. Because we are deciding that we're going to spend our educational funds to fund the police station in order to work our way around creating safer gun laws. And we're not just talking about safer gun laws because they're having to use training to help teachers and staff know how to deal with opioid overdoses. So we are using funding to create policies around the fact that people are using opioids in high school. People are bringing guns to school and killing people, injuring people, maiming people, probably because they don't have good quality of life. People who have good qualities of life are not usually on opioids. People who have good quality lives are not usually on opioids. People who have good quality of life don't usually bring guns to school and shoot people. People who have good quality lives don't sit around writing manifestos about how much they hate other people for stealing their jobs or for existing because they feel like they're taking their place in society. People who are generally happy with their lives are not participating in those acts. People who are generally educated about their history, about their governmental systems, about their society are usually not escaping through drug use and are usually not going to schools and shooting people because they want to prove a point. Yet, We are partially through this bill, and we still haven't even started talking about how we're going to better educate our young people. We're talking about how we're going to keep them from overdosing on opioids, and how we're going to try to be prepared for the fact that one of our children are going to bring guns to school and our other children will be in danger. That's how we're choosing to live our lives, and that's how they chose to write this bill. So, one of the main reasons that teachers did right and have been against this act um, is because of the Teacher Fair Act of 1983, which one included the contracts, two allow them to be notified when they were being fired, and I'm assuming also have some type of severance if they're fired without notice. I don't know much about the bill. I'm going to have to look more into it later. This bill, I mean, it was before my time, and this bill is large enough. Am I right? So, uh, one thing that bill did do is create standardized testing for every teacher every year. I don't know if that's still true. Um, because it didn't even require most teachers to be certified teachers before this bill, because they were hired on as paraprofessionals because they weren't able to find teachers, and this bill takes away the necessity for certification in some ways. So I have to look more into that bill and get back to you on that. When I just have some extra free time and want to read a bill that was written in 1983 that is no longer applies. But the testing will continue when it comes to the student body. It doesn't tell us what type of standardized testing that they would be using. They just say it's going to be monitored by the Division of Elementary School and Secondary Education um, person, which happens to be this person named Jacob Oliva. Did a little research on him. Governor Sanders picked Oliva from Florida. He's been working in Florida schools for a long time. He was a principal. He was a teacher, a principal. He worked for the school board. He was also a superintendent. Now, it's interesting to me that Florida, if I'm not mistaken, has a C minus overall as a state when it comes to their schools. We in Arkansas have a C, right? So why are we plucking administrators from failing school systems to come help our failing school system? That I'll never understand. What is it about dear old Florida that we are so anxious about being a part of when it comes to education? When Jacob Oliva was selected to be superintendent of his county, he was protested by the NAACP because they felt like his view on history and what history could be taught and couldn't be taught in schools was a little bit jaded. And I would have to say that they were probably right, seeing that Florida is now having the argument about whether or not you can teach AP African American history in high school. In one county, they just decided they weren't even going to have the fight. The school that was affiliated with the college that was affiliated with the high school just decided they weren't going to offer it, right? Not to mention that AP African American history is an elective. It's an elective for 11th and 12th grade history, and it is not a requirement. That's the definition of an elective, is that you don't got to do it. It is not required to graduate that you know who Malcolm X, Angela Davis, Ida B. Wells are. You don't have to know who they are. It's an elective. And they're saying that right there might fall under the chopping block of indoctrination, because knowing their names might what? Change their viewpoint just a smidge? offer something a little bit different than whatever might be acceptable by Jacob Oliva when he's deciding what is and isn't acceptable for educational history content? Mm, okay. So we finally get to page 14 and we start to talk about student success plan. When student success plans start, the first thing they begin to explain is the need for literacy assessments, which when I first read this, I was like, yes, absolutely. This needs to be done. Um, because I have worked in the educational system and I know for sure that these babies are not reading on their proper grade level. They're not writing on their proper grade level. So there needs to be more assessments. And this right here is focused on K through third grade. But then I started to get a little bit uncomfortable with the idea because they are encouraging transformation from public schools to privately funded schools open to the public, which are called charter schools. And once they have this data, once they have this information, they can do whatever they want with it, right? That that is their prerogative because they are in fact privately owned. So just let's take a step back and talk about that for a minute. So a charter school is a privately funded school that is open to the public that is free for now, right? An example of that would be in my area would be KIP, capital K, capital I, capital P, capital P. Current Bloomberg that is working for KIP would be Emma Bloomberg. These are millionaires. These are this is the top 1%. These are corporations. Why? Why are they investing in our public schools? Why are they investing so much into our public schools that they would like to end up being the only thing that is offered to the public? Are their privately owned schools? In order for corporations to do something, it has to benefit them in the long run. So what long-term goal do these corporations have when it comes to the education of our young people? We should all be concerned about that. We are not ready for a corporate takeover of our education system like we're dealing with the corporate takeover of our actual governmental body, the US Congress, the Senate House. That's things that don't work in the interest of the people, but work in the interest of corporations. We're not ready for that in our education system. That being said, I went to Kip's website and I looked at Emma's bio. And this is on the Kip website, okay? Not Emma's me page. Enumeration, which she launched in 2014, provides sophisticated data and analytics, proprietary technology, strategic guidance, and pro- programmatic support to help partners build political power and to marshal support so necessary changes can be improved in our public schools. Okay, let's break that down. First of all, it went from, okay, this is my KIP information to saying, oh, I started a company in 2014 where we provide sophisticated data and analytics and strategic guidance and programmatic support to help build political power. So when you ask yourself, what do these millionaires have in mind when they want to create these schools? They want to create data collecting farms that help their partners build political powers and do the necessary changes to provide improvements for public schools. But that was literally the last thing in the bio. She told us in her bio she is interested in creating data that they can sell to people to gain political power. This is not these are not the people who we want running our schools. But as you read the bill, and after they start talking about these tests that will be collecting all this data, they go on to encourage transformation from a public school that is made by public institutions that will be created for public growth into privately funded schools that are open to the public, that are currently free, but can use the data that they collect for their own means and grow in their own political private interest. They they encourage this by one, changing the school grade as defined by the State Board of Education, which is again ran by Mr. Oliva, who can set the standards however he wants, right? Not imposing a sanction or taking action against public schools, and they mean privately funded schools that are open to the public, for failure to satisfy academic performance standards. Meaning, if you're a charter school, a private school owned by private people, but you're open to the public and you happen to be failing for a little bit, you got 2 years where you just won't show up. Okay? So we'll give you a 2-year transitional period where your grade will not necessarily be held up to academic standards for the state. And while you're transferring from a public school to a charter school, which is a privately owned school that is open to the public for free right now, you will have federal funds to help you make that transition, which means that they had to set aside federal funds to be there and ready for when schools make that transition. So that right there in itself takes money away from general public schools and puts it into a little pocket fund for people who are transitioning as an encouragement, right? Because this is just an encouragement. Don't worry. Be happy. Do 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 do. Don't worry, be happy. So, after they encourage people to transfer over to these privately funded schools that are open to the public, that also have access to federal funds, they say, hey, we're going to create a community service program. And in this community service program, for every 75 hours that a learner collects, and this is in high school, they will receive 1 credit hour towards graduation. So you need 22 hours to graduate from high school in Arkansas. Of these credits, I looked it up. I have it up here for me somewhere. There are 7-ish flex credits, which is a lot when you're 7 out of 22 hours are flex credit. So one of those flex credits just happens to be science. The other ones all fall under career focus and content electives. So while AP African American history might be a little, too risky for our young people to use as an elective, we might be willing to send them into the workforce so that they can get some community service, and that can be used towards graduating. So we picked Oliva from Florida for a reason. So I went over to Florida and I asked myself, okay, what are some of the schools they're doing in order to have community service available? Where did I put that information? So, approved volunteer options for some schools in Florida include working but not being paid at 501c3s, nursing homes, music festivals or drama themed projects that donate their proceeds to a third party, animal hospitals, volunteering with lawyers and doctors and dentists when they're working pro bono, volunteering at camps, tutoring peers, political campaigning, religious functions, including teaching and proselytizing. Y'all, I was a youth leader when I was in high school for my junior and senior year. I could not imagine the idea of me leading Wednesday night service could eventually count towards a college credit. Excuse me, a high school credit. We're talking about high school. You're saying that someone goes and teaches Bible study at their church, that can be counted towards 75 hours of community service towards a credit in school. Because what, you might want to be a preacher? You're saying that what they're learning at the church is equivalent to what they'll be learning at school? Like those things are the same caliber? No. So in Arkansas state schools, for example, the science flex credit falls under, what is the exact name? If Oh, that's what it's called. It says approved oh my goodness, excuse me. They have an approved mathematics and science flex credit. So that means that's 8 out of 22 credits that can be used in a flex mannerism. So when it talks about approved science ideas, they spoke about a flex credit for science being following an engineer or computer engineer around and learning from them and helping them with their jobs in different ways that would create some type of curriculum, individualized curriculum for young people. And that can be subbed for an actual science class. And what does it take to be approved? In order for you to be approved to be a community service location, Jacob Oliva has to give you the thumbs up. It doesn't have to be up to academic standards. The bill makes that clear. And it just makes me wonder, Arkansas Governor Sanders, she just went back on the child labor laws. I'm going to read them to you because it was so simple. This act is to dispense the state requirements that children under the age of 16 have to obtain permission from the Division of Labor in order to be employed. This restores the decision making to the parents concerning their children. It streamlines the hiring process for children under the age of 16. And basically does not require for them to have to be certified for special means in order to work under the age of 16. So I'm interested to how these two bills are going to interact, because they will in some way. And I am against any type of free labor in any type of capacity. I worked for nonprofits for 11 years and never made a living wage. So it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. But let's let's get our children back to work. Let's get our children back to work because in education, you know, the one thing my grandfather wanted for his grandchildren were that they were able to finish high school, get their diploma, and he wanted all of us to be able to go to college. Why? Because he was only able to go to school through the 8th grade. That's why. And one thing that he used to say to me all the time was, get your education because that's the one thing they can never take away from you. He knew from experience. He knew from experience. In this same section on indoctrination, they also talk about, I'm going to read this to you because it's very specific. Preventing human trafficking and making sure that they have programs to prevent human trafficking and recognizing child abuse. Great. Always a good thing. You can't have too much education in that area because people who traffic for a living work hard to hide it. And there are always new things to learn about anti-trafficking efforts. And the better we educate our school systems, the more we can end trafficking at an early age and keep these young people from being victimized. So educating our teachers about anti-trafficking efforts is important. It also says before grade 5, the public school teacher shall not provide classroom instruction on the following topics: sexually explicit materials, sexual reproduction, sexual intercourse, gender identity, sexual orientation. Okay. On the surface, all of that is really great. Obviously, we don't want our kids to be exposed to sexually explicit material that is traumatizing and damaging to their psyche as young people. Okay. Nobody wants their child to be over sexualized. Anybody who says that they want their child to be over sexualized or that a group of people want that, they are lying. The only group of people who want children to be over sexualized are predators. Okay. And that's not what our education system is doing. Our educational system is not doctrine created by predators. It is curriculum that is created by educators to make sure that our students understand how the human body works. Right? So I was 9 years old when I started my cycle for the first time, and it wasn't because I was sexually molested or that I was it my body started menstruating early. It's also a sign of endometriosis. Could have been a sign of some of the chemicals that were being put in my body because of social standards, but that's something that we'll find out many years from now. Regardless, I started my period when I was 9. I was in the 9th grade. I was in the 4th grade. I learned about menstrual cycles in a room from a publicly funded educating video that they put on for us in the 3rd grade that said, "Hey, women have cycles, and this is how it works. And this is what happens when a woman starts their cycle." And it was probably a 15-minute video. There was also the option that if you didn't want your kid to be educated on it, they they took the kid out of the class, and the ones who were able to be educated on it were able to be educated. There's no reason why we shouldn't be educating our young people on how their bodies work. Waiting to the 5th grade is too late to introduce someone to the topic of the sexual reproduction organs. Now, of course, you can say, oh, well, that's the parents' job. That's the parents' job. Why can't this be a community effort? There might be some scientific things that the school can provide that maybe the parent leaves out on accident because they're not educators and this isn't a comfortable conversation that they have with their kid, especially not for the first time at 9, right? So, why not have a community of people who we can turn to say, "Hey, this is what a period looks like." And for some people, it hurts a lot, and for some people, it doesn't. But just know harmful periods are not normal, right? That's something I didn't learn until I was much older and had been ignored by many a doctors. Having an extremely debilitating, painful period is not normal. And if you're 9 years old and you are not educated by the school, and let's say you're in a single parent household and you no longer have your mommy at home to explain to you how periods are supposed to work, you don't have any place to go to get that information. YouTube, I guess. Okay. Also, gender identity. No one, again, no one is walking into a classroom under the great age of 5 and saying, "Hey, let me educate you about my gender identity." That's not what's happening. But what it is happening in some places, like Florida, if a teacher were to mention that they have a partner of the same sex, that would be then educating their young people about their gender identity. They can't say, "Oh, I was with so and so this weekend and we went to a movie," and someone says, "Oh, who's so and so?" Oh, that's my wife, and they happen to be a woman. And guess what? They've just indoctrinated your children with gender identity politics. These We already pick curriculum according to the proper educational age. Putting stipulations like this under indoctrination is making it more difficult for people to be themselves in the classroom. It is making it easier to fire people and hire them, but fire people on the basis of who they are in their personal lives. And you should be able to be whomever you want to be when you're not on the clock, as long as you're not damaging the community or anyone else. So after we make questionable decisions about child labor laws and what may or may not be considered community service, we move right along into indoctrination. Now, if they hold up to this subsection, they will make sure that nobody will be able to get college credit, excuse me, that nobody will be able to get high school credit for proselytizing or teaching in religion, right? That's what we would hope this subsection would protect against. But they are worried about promoting and teaching indoctrination and ideologies such as critical race theory, which is not taught in K through 12. It's only available to law students in the master program. It says that the secretary shall amend, annul, or alter the rules, policies, materials, and communications that are considered prohibited indoctrination and in conflict with the principle of the equal protection under the law. So that's where you're like, okay, critical race theory is not something that is taught in K through 12. So are they what I want to notice that they didn't define critical race theory, even though they defined indoctrination, right? Which they said is the process of teaching a person or group of people to accept a belief uncritically. That's what they consider to me indoctrination, but they don't define critical race theory, which is not taught. Okay. They say anything that comes in conflict with the principle of equal protection under the law or encourages students to discriminate against someone based on an individual's skin color, creed, race, ethnicity, sex, age, marital status, familial status, disability, religion, national origin, or any other characteristics protected by federal law. And all of that is under the direct control of Jacob Oliver himself. Sounds like a good idea, right? Moving on from their indoctrination subsection, they move on to digital learning, which a lot of it has been removed. So, the Digital Learning Act of 2013, where they required all high school students to complete at least one digital learning course so that they can become familiarized with the idea of an online course, that has been removed. Also, with that is the removing of um, the necessity for infrastructure in the schools, requiring that the schools be set up so that learners can take online courses. Which why are we taking away infrastructure? Mandatory infrastructure should be required. While they were removing mandatory digital learning, they are allowing options for individualized learning courses, online courses that just have to be approved by the State Board of Education, which boils down to being Mr. Oliva himself. I I have some issues with that. They don't require uh people who learn online these online courses to be up to the Board of Education standard, and they also don't have to be taught by a certified teacher. So while they have options for learners to go 100% remote, they never have to come into the school. They are not up to code when we're talking about standards for education, and the teachers do not have to be certified in any type of way. Okay, the next large piece of the school act is the Emergency School Act, is the Impact Tutoring Pilot Program. Pilot program, this is a brand new program. It's providing funding for schools and privately funded schools that are open to the public, also known as charter schools, allowing privately funded schools access to grant money for these tutoring programs, which grant money that is for public funded schools should only go to public funded schools, not privately owned schools that are open to the public. It also allows for paraprofessional programs to be hired in organizations that I like. And I've seen those independent tutoring programs that could come in after school and teach tutoring programs and individualized tutoring packets to students who need them. That would be great. Again, I feel like it should only be available to public schools and not privately funded schools that are open to the public. But and it's still a good idea. As long as those privately owned schools don't hire their own organizations to then tutor their own organizations, and our students don't actually get the information they need. But money is then again funneled to other people's pockets. They also the stipend will allow them to hire retired teachers to tutor, which I think is a great idea. It will give access to technology-based tutoring services, funding for it at least. Then it says that it includes administrative cost. That I don't like because we're talking about a tutoring pilot program, and we're not talking about administrative costs for the hiring for this tutoring program. They're talking about general administrative cost. So by allowing this tutoring pilot program to be open to charter schools, which are privately owned schools that are open to the public, that means that they can also use some of this money for administrative costs. That's not okay. That means they can use tutoring pilot program to give their principal a raise, for example. And no. Right. So they allow for them to use this program again to fund getting grants to get more money. That's an administrative cost. That's a loophole for using tutoring money for other things. Shouldn't be in there. Um, it also allows for the money for this pilot program to be used to create curriculum, which would be great if it was for public schools, but now you're using privately owned schools. You're giving them money to create curriculum on the taxpayer dollar. I'm not okay with that. And creating administrative tools. Again, that's another way to funnel money. And it says that tutoring money can also be used to help for testing assessments, which is great if you're talking about things like the ACT, SAT standardized testing for schools. And that's not what they're talking about. Again, they're talking about data that can be used however the privately owned schools decide they want to use them. And these tests are being created now with the taxpayer dollar through this tutoring program. So while I like the idea of a tutoring program, especially since looking at the schools in my area, I don't think any of them had an after school program. So, yes, we want our kids to have access to an after school program, but not under a pilot program that allows for the funneling of money into private interest hands. I'm not okay with that. And that's where my notes stop. Okay, like I said, I am only partially way through the bill, but I decided that I would stop and make a video on what I had already because it was just so much information. So the idea that our legislators were able to really construct this bill, talk about it, make the proper changes, make sure that they're not leaving anything out, make sure that things are properly defined, things that are properly allocated to be spent on our children and not on administrative costs or lining the pockets of public interest. That was not possible for this 144-page bill in less than 10 days. It's not possible. So, to be continued, we have much more to talk about. Thank you for listening to Indica with me. Please like, subscribe, and share.